Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. And for all the fellas out there that's tuning in today, happy Father's Day to you. And hopefully, it's a very special day for you guys. And if you guys are tuning in, thank you for that as well. For everyone else, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for your continued support. And if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor. Head on over to your YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And of course, it's Father's Day. The conversations don't stop. I have a very special guest for you guys, my friend, my colleague, my niece. She is joining us today to tell about her story, about the work that she does. And we're just going to have an amazing conversation. Kama over on Instagram. Thank you for tuning in and everything, and everybody else. Thank you guys for tuning in. Now, as always, I would like to say that these conversations are important, and I'm having them with people who are out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. And of course, before I bring up my guests, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. This is a live stream, so if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. Now, without further ado, I'm going to bring up my next guest. Francis Helena. Hi, Francis.
Hi, Uncle Tony. Hi, everyone. Happy Father's Day. It's actually Father's Day in Australia is actually September, so there's a
Okay,
bit of a
okay.
difference there.
Everything's different.
Mhm.
Everything's different. So, how are you doing today?
It's cold. I think you and I were having a conversation before, so it is Australian winter time, but it's nothing like the northern hemisphere. It is we use Celsius here, Celsius degrees. So I think it must be about 40, maybe 40, yeah, 40 in Fahrenheit. So or lower than that. But by Australian standard, it's cold. You'll see everybody outside wearing jackets and hoodies. So yeah, because it's. I think when I checked, it was like 9 degrees. So it's quite
Oh,
cold here.
wow. Wow, that is cold, but we all go through it, man. Like our wintertime months, I was just like, this is crazy. I don't want to deal with this. I want to go somewhere where it's tropical, where it's just nice and sunny. May have to deal with some rain and wind once in a while, but no, I'm about over the seasons changing. I thought, at being 50 years old, I would go, you know, not too bad. Now I'm older. I'm like, nope. I want to be somewhere where I'm sweating. I don't need this problem.
Oh yes, well this would be really good for you because in Australia when it is summer it does get to like 40 or 50 degrees, which I think is about 108, 110 in Fahrenheit. But here it's well where my state is actually, I should say, it actually is it's sticky. So you might not like
Mm,
that.
yeah, it's humid. It's humid. Well,
Yeah.
before we get started, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Okay. Hi. I'm Frances Helena. So I'm originally from Australia, but I have been recently living in the UK. So I've been, that's why I've got this accent. I don't sound Australian at all anymore. But as I keep talking, my accent might change into something weird. So it could be that. But I'm actually hearing impaired. I became hearing impaired a few years ago, and I ended up becoming more of a creative. I've always been a creative since I was a kid, and I ended up at New York Fashion Week. So I'm actually a fashion designer now. So that was one of the ways I sort of, I guess, kept myself going because after changing, my basically my life basically changed because of my hearing loss. It took a lot out of me, and it wasn't like I couldn't do a 9 to 5 job. It was just because I basically ended up losing my hearing. But yeah, I became this fashion designer. We do quite a lot in the US. We basically upcycle clothing. If you don't like it, we can change it. And then a lot of the people we work with are people from the community. So you don't even have to be a model, but we have models as well as, people from the community, domestic violence victims, single mothers, and mothers, of course, with mothers in general, the body shape changes because they've had children, so there's a bit of a stigma there. So we put them on the runway, but we've had lots of different people with us, people who've never met, people who've been, wouldn't even talk to one another just because of, how society is and, things like that. But we brought people together to become like a big family. So yeah, lots of people have become friends with people they've never even thought they would be friends with. So yes, that's pretty much what we do about bringing people together and including them.
I love that. And you and I, we met a couple of years ago. I had Herbie on the show, and then we've done a few table talks together as well. And so ever since then, I've watched you grow into this amazing young woman that you are today, and it's been just beautiful watching you just come into your own. And most people that have seen you don't even know that you've had to face certain challenges, right? Going and getting to where you are. But it's just another avenue of showing people that, if you put your mind to it and you got a heart for it, you can achieve anything in this world. So now let's get into your journey a little bit. Tell people how you got to where you are today, and how did you overcome those challenges when they were presented to you and said, you know what, I think I'm going to turn this into a positive because I think there's a lot of people out there right now that's probably listening to this on this very special Father's Day that are interested. So yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think well for me, personally I was growing up I had a really privileged life. I was actually adopted from the Philippines. My mom's actually Asian and my dad is originally was born in the UK but migrated to Australia back in the 60s when there was a massive migration that came over and everything. And it was a lot cheaper. It's very different now.
Yes, yes, it was.
But so we've had a privileged life because of my dad's job. We got to travel and live all over the world. This is long before apps and social media, even how you and I are connecting right now online. It's so different now. By the time I was 10, I already lived in 7 countries. I've now lived in 10 countries. I'm now in my 30s. And so yeah, we basically moved around, just kept moving. And I think part of that was also, educational purposes, but mainly because of my dad's work and the company took care of it and everything like that. So we've lived everywhere: Mexico, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Australia. There's quite a big list. Sometimes I even forget where I've lived, but I've lived basically now. I've lived across pretty much. I've lived on 4 continents now. So yeah, so my aim is to eventually have a birthday on every continent. So yeah, that's exciting. But no, my I think for me, the journey was really about it's been a long, yeah, been a really long process actually, a lot of self discovery. But my parents actually ended up separating, and I'm actually technically an only child, but my dad previously has children from previous marriage and things like that. But so when my parents separated, it was actually kind of hard because up until a certain point, we all lived together, but my dad was mainly working overseas and everything like that. So it was, yeah, it was kind of hard, when I think for anybody who has had parents separated, definitely, you don't really know what to do. You sort of think if something goes wrong, or, you sort of think about, oh, have I done something wrong? You know what I mean? Like, because your parents have separated, but, it's really a conversation between both of them. But I think the way that it was done was a little out there. I have written about it though, which is actually public. so, but and my mom, she is from a very old culture. So she's from the Philippines, but she's very old school. And so, in Asia, they have this thing where once you're married, that's it. Like, you're pretty much with that person for life. Like, if you get separated, then that's like as a society, people sort of look down upon people and things like that. And it's just the Eastern thing, whereas in the West, people just they don't really care. But in the West, it's really more about me, myself, and I. You look out for the individual, whereas in a lot of Eastern cultures, you can go to Africa, the Pacific, even Latin America. We're really about the community. So, what you do if you're from a particular, if you're from a family, people know who you are. You can be like, oh, you'll just hear about the gossip and everything. So and so's family like split up, all that sort of stuff. And I think for my mom it was really tough because no one really, they were just judging. They didn't really understand what actually had happened. So it was more like they separated because my dad ended up meeting somebody else and that sort of stuff. So that was hard on my mom because she didn't really you know, know what to do and stuff. And it was hard on me because I just didn't want to deal with it. So I actually moved to another country. So I was sort of grieving in my own way. And when we talk about grief, we sort of be like, oh, it's about a loss of a person or that sort of thing, because they passed away. But I think with grief, there's so many different ways to actually speak about it. So I think for me, it was really the loss of having my parents split up because even though I spent majority of the time with my mom because it was just my mom and a cat. We always had a cat. So it was just us basically together because my dad was overseas all the time. So, and then when they actually finally decided to separate, it was just the way it was done was pretty hard, actually. So, because he basically left and then I didn't hear from him for about like 10 years. Didn't even see him for about 10 years. Like no phone call, no nothing. And then during COVID, he came back randomly and he'd been in contact with a close family friend who I've known for like ever. And so they said, oh, they want to get in contact. And I said, okay. So that was I think I was sort of mad about it because it was like I haven't heard from them in that long and now they wanted to talk. So despite that, we sort of talked about it. And then, I mean, we're talking now and everything, but sometimes they sort of drift in and out, which is kind of hard. So, yeah. And then it sort of feels like, well, I've got two parents or I've got one parent, and sometimes I see my other friends who've got like both parents. I'm like, oh, well, that would be nice. But I think you can look at life in so many ways and be like, well, I could always wish for something that I don't have. But, you know, that's not really going to get me anywhere. And I could be mad at, say, my dad, which I was, but that's just not going to get me anywhere either. So I've sort of chosen to just be like, okay, well, this has happened. And I mean, I'm talking with him, so I guess that's a good sign. But when I don't have to talk to him, whereas culturally from a Eastern perspective, they're like, oh, why are you not talking to him or whatever the case may be. But I think having grown up in both Eastern and Western culture has taught me there's certain ways you can do things and you can choose to deal with it in certain ways. You don't have to deal with it in one way or another. So yeah, I think that was the biggest challenge for me.
You know, you mentioned something. You said something that like growing up, watch your parents divorce and having to go through that grieving process. And you're absolutely right. That's one of the things that I love to put out there to people. Grief, it does not necessarily mean loss of a loved one, right? It could be loss of identity, loss of a job, loss of a house. You can grieve all types of things. Now, I want to talk about the process of grief that you went through, and kind of discuss the similarities because when we think about the five pillars of grief, right? You have anger, denial, bargaining, etc. All of these different things. Was the process of grief similar to that, or was you able to add things to it, right? Because you know you're looking at life through a different lens through watching your parents be divorced and having to navigate that world and dealing with the woulda coulda shouldas, right? So what's the process of grief similar to what you see other people experience?
Oh yeah, definitely. What you mentioned there, especially coming from having a mom who is from the Eastern culture. In the East, we don't really show emotion to things like that. Like it's just not a swept under the carpet. But having grown up in Australia, we talk about grief as like something, like what you and I are doing now, as something important, that something should be addressed, and it's okay to cry, it's okay for men to cry, all that sort of stuff. Whereas in the East, it's completely different. Anything bad. So, when I was sexually assaulted and things like that, that would sort of get swept under the carpet. Not because it's not important, but just unfortunately, culturally, it's just seen as a taboo. And some people watch you might be like, oh, that's a bit, but it's actually quite common in a lot of Eastern
Is it?
cultures. It doesn't matter if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa, in Latin America. It's mainly because there's so many other problems out there, because a lot of the places unfortunately have corrupt governments, so there's so much going on in the society. Not all these places. I mean, there's some more places that are super advanced, like Singapore is pretty advanced. But if you're talking about real third world countries that just don't have government support, don't have rehabilitation centers, and just don't have the manpower to support the community like they do in Australia. Like here we have, if you go on drugs, for example, you can go to a rehabilitation center. If you don't have a house, the government will put you on, benefits to help you find a house, find a job, whereas in a lot of Eastern countries that are really, economically poor, sorry, they don't have that, those resources. And so I think when, you come from a background like that, you sort of just shut down about, how you're feeling, and you go in denial and, all this sort of stuff. And I think that was one of the challenges, especially with my mom. She was basically like, oh, this isn't happening, that's not happening. But I actually ended up leaving her. So I actually moved to New Zealand at the time. And so I needed to like, oh look, I need to go get a fresh start, need to, do some stuff for me. But I think I had been going through some massive grieving process like for so long, because it was just like, oh, I'm trying to get some money together, but I just keep spending it. And, it wasn't like I couldn't save or anything. It was just like, I was like, oh, well, just going. And I ended up in, certain situations. Whereas my mom ended up having to move in with some friends. They had helped her for a little bit. And then, now she's got like a place of her own and everything. But it was really hard, I think, for the both of us, because we both couldn't just cope with the situation, really. Because for her, basically, she got married and it had, that was pretty much it. She was supposed to have this happy life that she thought she was going to have with this husband, all this sort of stuff, but it didn't really work out that way, And I think culturally it was it was a big shock, I think, because people are like, oh, we saw your parents, but they're not there anymore, like, because my mom and dad would go to church all the time and stuff like that. So, the community sort of saw us go there every Sunday, and they're like, oh, we haven't seen him for a while, and sometimes you don't really want to tell everything to everybody, because let's be honest, sometimes they're just nosy. They're just nosy
This is
for no
true.
reason.
This is very
You know,
true.
yeah, and it was actually interesting because there was a auntie who we're friends with. She actually went through a similar thing, but she said once I told them the truth about what happened, they actually stopped treating me the way that they did. And in my mind, I was like, I get that, but why does it you have to, why is it you have to tell someone the truth in order for them to understand? Like, shouldn't they just understand automatically? But that's just not how we human beings work, right? We sort of judge the situation, and then we'll be like, oh, and then we're like, oh, this is what really happened. Okay. So, I think grief comes in so many different ways, like whether you just, decide to shut down and not talk about it. Because that was, for a really long time, like my mom and I just couldn't, talk about it. She just didn't want to hear about it, that sort of thing. And, it was just kind of hard. So that's why we can't exactly live together for too long, maybe a week. And that'll be it. But I think over time it's gotten a bit better, but I think at the same time I'm still kind of like I think mad or just so many other things because there was just so many things that had happened to me that I needed someone, like a parent, and they just weren't there because I don't have any siblings. So, but I've been fortunate enough to have really good friends. And when I was in New Zealand, I actually had a miscarriage. So I actually didn't know that I was pregnant. But I remember just being in the hospital. That I had a host family at the time, and the host mom, she's already passed away now. But the host mom and dad and the son actually came down to the hospital and everything. And so yeah, I was basically just like alone in this hospital. But the hospital people were really good, but it was just like, oh, okay. And I already knew um, the answer I was going to receive when I sent a text um, to basically one of my parents, and I was like, oh, I already know, just because it's a cultural thing, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll try and just see, you know, what if the reaction is different. The reaction was so not different, just because one of them is very religious, so it was just like, yeah, really hard. So it was just yeah, just one of those things that I still sort of was, I guess, upset about. But I mean, like I said, I could be upset about so many things, about being sexually assaulted, the whole thing. But I've chosen to not be, even though, like I said, I could be. But for some reason, I just decided to look at life in a more positive way and everything.
I love that. You said a lot of things there. I want to unpack a few of those things. One of the things that you said, like when you were sexually assaulted, and your government didn't have the resources to pour into that, right? Whereas I hear something like that, and immediately I'll go, no, that should not happen, right? No one should have to endure something like that, that degrading act from someone else. And don't get me wrong, look, I get it. There's bad people out here in the world. It just pisses me off. That's all. It really does. It pisses me off when I hear about women being sexually assaulted or children being violated like that. Because for one, I was raised by the women in my family, and they were very strong women. So if you did something to them, you had to deal with a whole bunch of them. Now, that's not saying that it didn't happen or anything like that, but if you knew my uncles, they were like, you don't touch my sister, you don't touch my mother, etc. And so we as young men was raised under that rule. Like you don't mess with the women in our family, because if so, you have to deal with us. A lot of times the women dealt with it. It was like, maybe you should want to deal with us. You definitely don't want to deal with them, because they're gonna get you wrong, right? Um, and people cared, right? People cared what happened, because I grew up in a community, in a village, so to speak. I'm a '70s baby, so I grew up in a village where everybody looked after everyone, and things like that. Yes, there were still some things that happened. Trust me, I was a victim, or I'm not even gonna call myself a victim. I was a survivor of childhood molestation. And afterwards it was just like, I had an idea that no one was going to come and save me, and that the focus should have been on the women. So I had to navigate that alone. And how do without the support and everything from your surroundings, the community, or even the government, how does Francis navigate that horrible ordeal? Like, because I know it's kind of really hard to accept in a lot of places. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think I should also say when the time when I was first sexually assaulted, that was actually when I was visiting my dad overseas because he used to work away a lot. So, we used to go to these places. So this was actually, yeah, overseas. So otherwise, if it was in Australia, I guess it would have been done differently because the government here is really good like that. You could actually report it, that sort of thing. So we're going back nearly what year is that now? 2000, 2006. Yeah, 2006. So to
Wow.
that day, uh, yeah, I don't know. I think it's the weirdest thing for me. Not even weird, but I think maybe I feel bad. Like, I don't even know how to explain it because I was really young. I was 16 at the time, and then I had met somebody else who, at the time, so the first person that did this to me was 21, and I was 16. And then a few weeks later, because I had just turned 16 and everything, I was over there for my birthday. And so the next person I met was 36 at the time, and I was 16. And, that person to this day, so neither of these people have been charged. And I think in my mind, I don't know how to. It sounds so odd to me. I guess it's more like I don't know how to address it. Like I don't know how to like say, because I was like, oh, sometimes I think about, oh, what if I wanted to charge them? How would I go about doing that? Because it's in another country, that sort of thing. And this is going back decades ago. And for me personally, I studied criminology. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into, the field of criminology and law and stuff like that was also to help like migrant women, that sort of thing. And so eventually, gonna can pretty much still doing that like at university and working on studying domestic violence responses at the moment. But I think that was the biggest thing. I didn't really know how to address it or where to go. Some people said, "Oh, you can charge them," and I said, "Yeah, but how? Like it's in a different country. It's not like you can just go to the police in Australia and be like, oh, this and this happened." It's a completely different process. Especially if it's in like another country. But that guy who's 36, he's now in his 50s, and I remember him saying that he would always find me, which is the most scariest thing actually, because he did, because I was on, when social media started kicking in, he actually found me. So I had to block him. And then it wasn't until last year or last year or the year before, I found out where he was. So he's actually in Europe. And, we had a conversation because I was like, oh, maybe I wanted to like meet the person just to have this conversation. But then I've got some good friends who are like, no, that's a bad idea. Like, and I was just, so I had that conversation with that person, and they said, oh, it was all about love and everything. I was like, you were 36 at the time, and I was 16. Like, that was, because we used to send pictures back then. Obviously, if you're from, this around the same age as me, you'll know that we had all those Nokia phones. So it wasn't like a phone, like an iPhone. It was a text phone, and you just open it, and so it was that sort of thing. And so yeah, that guy basically. So anyway, I blocked him and everything, but I think it was the thing that I wanted to talk to him to sort of ask why. Like, why did you pick me? Because this person also has nieces. And so I think that was my biggest thing now that I'm older, was sort of like I felt bad because I didn't say anything, or I didn't know how to say anything. And I didn't really have like anyone I could go to be like, hey, this is what happened. Like, what do I do now? Sort of thing. Because I felt like, the people I had were sort of just in their own world. And I guess it's not because they're selfish, maybe it's just because of how they've been brought up. Because, my parents are from the 40s and the 50s. It's a completely different time to,
Yeah.
being born in the 90s. And my parents were like a year older, maybe 10 or 20 years older than a lot of my friends' parents. So, but I was fortunate enough to have really good friends. And, I became like pretty much everybody's second daughter in the family. So I was fortunate enough. And I think, having moved from Asia, because when we finally moved back to Australia, it was about 12. And then when I went to school here, I saw how people were very open. So, it wasn't until then I started building like relationships with friends, families, and things like that. And they sort of taught me how to be really open. Because in the East, there's certain things that you keep private. One is personal life, one is money, and what was the other thing? Can't remember what the other thing is, but it's basically, because in Asia, or even, if you go to Africa, Latin America, you'll hear everybody. They'll be like, oh, my son is a doctor and he's got like a PhD. That's like one of the first things you'll hear, So it's all about material stuff, So people are really, in the East, we're still very, I guess, absorbed in our emotions about really addressing, certain things being without feeling like someone's going to judge us. So when I moved over to Australia, I sort of found that here people don't judge you in that way. And I should be very particular when I say Caucasian people, because we have, lots of people who migrated to Australia and everything, but it really depends on, who you're talking to. Some people are like, oh, that might be a bit racist or whatever, but there is a difference, believe it or not, there is a difference culturally, whether you've been brought up in the UK or in Australia. And I know in the States it's completely different. Like I think as an Australian I might be offensive to some Americans because I'm very openly spoken, even though I turn around and sort of say, well, isn't that classified as freedom of speech? So, there's a
Yeah.
whole different level of how you communicate and what you say because in Australia we're very open because we don't have things like gun violence, so people can just say whatever you feel like saying, but depending on who you say it to, someone could punch you, but that's just hypothetically, if depending on what it is. But it's not like people just walk around punching people. No, it's just if you say something ridiculous, or
I
they
don't
might come
know.
in just to,
I don't know. When I
so
was younger, I used to go around punching people. I punched a lot of people. I really did. Like me and my buddies used to have contests when we were in our 20s and stuff like that. Go around. How many people can we knock out today?
oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, we did a lot of we did a lot of that. So I wouldn't say you can't, people don't go around punching people because we did. We punched a lot of people, you know. But it's kind of frowned upon now. Shouldn't go around doing that. I wouldn't recommend people go around doing that. Not unless you really have to, you know. And so I mean, but it still happens, even with the gun violence and everything. I mean, sad epidemic. Just yesterday, we just had another mass shooting in another state. You know, and it just makes it look bad for people that that own guns, right? You know what I'm saying? The responsible gun owners. Now that's one of the positive things about living in the states is that we do have that right to bear arms, right? You know what I'm saying? Because everybody in the world has the right to protect yourself. Um, and but sometimes people abuse that. Um, but what I'm saying, what do? You just you understand it. You got to keep moving, things like that. Understand that life is life, um, and sometimes it's not the kindness. Now, when you talk about um, navigating the grieving aspect that comes along with that, what was some of the challenges that you had to endure during the process of finding yourself again, right? Because a lot of it, from what I understand, and what I'm picking up, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of that's redefining who you are now, what I'm saying? Now you had these things happen, right? So you got a whole loss of identity too, right? Like, okay, my parents are divorced. I've gone through these horrible things, this horrible ordeal. You've studied criminology, so I can see that aspect in you as well. Like, I'll take you down type thing. It's like that's pretty cool, right? You know what I'm saying? Like that is pretty cool. Um, But now, how did Frances find her identity as she's beginning to grow um, in this new world that you're in?
I think it's taken a long time, because I didn't really have that family support growing up. Whereas a lot of my friends, they can just go to their mom or dad and be like, oh, this happened, and it's okay. Like there's some solution or whatever. But I think for me, it was mainly I sort of turned to things like we grew up with music, so I think that's the one thing about our house. So even though it was really complicated, we grew up with lots of love, lots of food. We love music. So, my dad used to play everything from, Stevie Wonder to Lionel Richie, all that good stuff and everything. So music had always been a big thing for me. So music actually, I think there was a saying that I was reading. Music is something that doesn't change or doesn't go away. Unlike people, it does. People change, they go away, but music is something that stays. So I think that's more of a comfort thing. And sometimes I like nature. So I think, but for me, I think with the whole identity thing, I think it took me a long time because I saw a friend. I had a friend. She's Chinese. So like me, she's the only child, but she was going through a big thing with her family where because she had two Asian parents, it was just like, and they already had migrated to Australia and everything, so it was just a full blown thing, culturally and all that sort of stuff, and she was just going through this massive thing. But she's married now and she's got a couple of kids and she's doing well. But, I think we both could sort of relate to it because we just culturally couldn't go to our families about certain things and, because we already knew the reaction. And so I think having the identity part was really about just, connecting with other people and, sort of having them say, "Oh, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to feel this way," So it took me a long time to really, I guess, understand that it's okay to speak about things that people don't actually address. And I think that was one of the hardest things, especially coming from a place where, a lot of those things are a massive taboo, like nothing's being done about it, that sort of thing. Whereas, you can actually, in Australia, you can actually get help if you ask for it. And so I think that was one of the biggest things that, growing up here, that I sort of learned from like other friends and that, really understand how to actually talk to people and things like that. And this is all before apps and social media, so it's very different now. Whereas now you see, kids, if something goes wrong, they talk about it or they publish it, whereas that's not really, it's good, but it's not really the way to, address it. You actually have to talk to somebody rather than posting it on social media. So it took me a long time to actually really address it. And some people said I needed like counseling. And I think my biggest thing about counseling, I went to someone and they said, "Oh, how does that make you feel?" Like, and it's just that sort of thing where I'm like, really, I've just told you, like, why do you need to ask me how does it make you feel when I just told you? So I sort of found counseling kind of like, yeah, I don't know, odd for me. I was like, okay, maybe I just need a better counselor or something. So it was just, I guess that sort of took me a long time. And I have moments where because I've had all that negativity and toxic, stuff in my life, it sort of took me a while to really believe in myself and the things that I do, especially with all the stuff that I do now. I'm like, oh, can I actually do this? But then when I read all the comments or I have somebody who is like, oh, I really like what you do, I think for me that helps me feel better because I don't get enough at it. And we as a society in general, it doesn't matter whether you live in the East or the West, if you look at all the kids who, all the people who have had that really positive, family outcome, still get the parents together, you can see the massive difference between them and people who have dealt with people who are, grown up in a toxic environment. You can see them like they're just flawless at everything they do. They're excelling because of that positivity that they've had growing up, And I'm not saying that one can't have too much positivity. I don't know, maybe. But, you can just see that they are very different between people who have grown up with a lot of toxic. And I'm not saying that I haven't, none of us are perfect and everything like that. But I'm also sort of have that moment where I'm like, oh, am I enough? Am I, you don't ever hear that from someone who has grown up with a lot of positiveness and stuff. They're like, no, I am enough. Like, you just hear them just the way they talk and everything. So there's a massive difference between that. And I think for me, it just took me a long time, because now I try to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who are in that sort of zone. But sometimes it's hard, when you start your business or when you're moving countries or whatever, it can be a lonely process. So you're sort of grieving that because you're like, oh my god, I don't know what's going on, or I want someone to talk to, but it's going to be okay. So I think that was one of the biggest things for me. I was like, if I'm not doing this, then what am I doing? So I think that was one of the things about what I do, was just that really keeps me going, was just the people's comments about what I do had really, helped me personally.
We got Ada tuning in over on
Oh,
LinkedIn. We got
hello.
yeah, do you remember Ada? Yeah, so
Hi,
Ada's tuning
Ada.
in over on LinkedIn. She's still here. She was just on the show yesterday. We have
Ah,
Regina over here on IG. Wants some book tuning in. Thank you guys for tuning in over there as well. And everyone else who's been tuning in. And again, if you guys have any questions, comments, put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. And we're just doing a really special Father's Day podcast. And for everybody who knows my story, you already know that this is a very special day. And not only is it Father's Day, but it's my mother's birthday. And it's a representation of tomorrow, which is 9 years for my son being passed. So this is just one way of giving back and showing people that um, strength comes in different ways. And to honor our loved ones. And today we have Frances Helena. Those who know Frances, I've known Frances a couple of years now. She's my little niece. She's in Australia, and we're just talking about her journey. So, Frances, let's talk about. You wrote a book, right? And when did you find your voice during your development of becoming who you are? And then we'll talk about how did you get into the work that you are, or when you got diagnosed with your hearing loss. So when did you write your book?
it was, what was that? 2022. Yeah. So I was with a company who, I thought it was really powerful, powerful. What am I even saying? But like, it was like a community that, just allowed you to basically, speak about what you were going through and things like that. And so I basically ended up co-authoring this book. And so it's called Me Too, but Never Again. But it was about, people's personal experiences about sexual abuse, rape, the whole 9 yards. And when I wrote it, I don't think my parents have actually read it. Like I said, my parents were born in the 40s and 50s. It's a completely different time, even though I was like, you can type me into Google now. But that doesn't mean anything to them. So, you know, but,
Understood.
but I wrote this book and it was really about reflecting on that. But I can't remember if I think I might have wrote it in third person because I wasn't sure how to address it if I was actually going to, write it in a way that would sort of put them on the spot, but it was mainly more about me just sort of reflecting on it and what had happened. Because, like I said, my parents were born in the 40s and 50s, which is completely different time. So obviously, the whole generational thinking is completely different to how it is now. But when I do stuff or when I write stuff, it's not about saying that they're bad parents, because they're not. There's good things and bad things that I picked out about them. You know what I mean? And so, sometimes people be like, oh, dad's not a good dad and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, he's done some stuff. But I also look at, the good things that he has done. I've looked at, that he loves music, he's taught me some really good values, which he might not instill in himself. But, he instilled in me, and I've, carried it on and that sort of stuff. And with my mom, she might not, culturally want to talk about stuff, but, it's been a progressive thing for her, that sort of stuff. And, there's been some good things about our relationship and those bad things, but I think, every family has good and bad, things that happen between each individual. And so when I wrote the book, it was really to highlight about my personal experiences of bad things and what you can do to overcome them, or how you can sort of, channel through that situation, and, what you can do. So I think when I wrote that, co-authored that book with those ladies, because it was part of a group called She Rises, which is based out in LA. And so, yeah, it's basically really talking about, what the experiences uh, did to myself personally, and what I chose to do about it, even though there's some things that I can't actually do or still don't know how to do. Like I said, none of these people had ever been charged. I have no idea how to even go about that or where to start, because this is going back more than, I think, 20 years ago now, at least. Yeah. Because what did I say? That was 2006 when that happened. So, it's quite a long time ago. And obviously now it's changed. Now they've got things like DNA. Now there's things like you need actual physical evidence, the whole nine yards. So it's changed a lot. But writing has been a way that has helped me to sort of express, you know, how I feel. And so, been basically on, there's a, what's that website called? It's called Vocal Media, but you can basically they've got like challenges, and you can just basically write about whatever the topic is, and you might win some money. So I'm still yet to win some money, so that's in the pipeline. um, but it's really more about speaking about, yeah, just how you feel. And I think writing is definitely one way to address certain topics and things. So I think that's been really good for me that way.
Okay, that you know what, that's really impressive, right? Because a lot of people never really find their avenues of releasing, and they get stuck. And when I say this, I don't mean to offend anyone, because I've been there. I've been stuck. I've been, it's been a long journey. It's been a hell of a fight. In order to just get to where I am, especially in the world, in my own self, finding my voice, learning how to speak properly, and say, no, this is what's actually going on with me, and recognizing it too as well, right? And realize that there's still things about me. I'm never going to be perfect. The healing process is continually going to go on. And, as long as I'm able to look at the things that's going on, there are some things that I hold on to, because for me, it keeps me safe in a lot of ways, to avoid running to other people's walls, or running to other people's choices. Right? I have a motto: I will not be a victim of your choices. I will not be a casualty of your choices. So if I could see it beforehand, and I could, and put it all together, I would go, no, and I will move out of your way, let you go right ahead. And There's a comment: congratulations to anyone who pushes past the grief and being stuck. This is very, very true. This
Ah,
comes from
thank
Regina
you.
What's book on IG. Thank you, Regina, for that. And she has an amazing book as well. If you ever get a chance to connect with her, she's a beautiful person, has a beautiful soul, and she's out here doing some amazing things as well. So Now, now I have two questions, and I don't know if you answered it or not, and if you did, I do apologize. But when did you get diagnosed with hearing loss?
Oh, what year is it now? It is. It's been 10 years, almost 10 years now. Yeah, because I was 25, so I was living in New Zealand at the time. So New Zealand is earthquake prone. It just has earthquakes. They just do their thing when they feel like it. But my ears didn't stop ringing for some reason. It just kept going ring, ring, ring. And so I went to the audiologist and they said, oh, you've already lost, 50%. So I was 25 at the time. Basically lost 50% in both ears. And with hearing loss, it's been it's changed a lot over the years. People have more understanding about it. They, starting to develop X, Y, B, and Z. But at the time, you couldn't get funding for it because of your age, because hearing loss was mainly associated with people who are older, right? People who were in their 70s, 80s, or children, from birth. But
Yeah.
because I basically had hearing loss, like it just come about, they didn't know what to do with me. And so when I came back to Australia, I went to the audiologist and everything. And so I managed to get some hearing aids. The problem is the cost. So if you don't have hearing aids can cost just a pair for some little dangly things. Um, they cost between $3,000 to $10,000. Now if you don't have that kind of money, you're just like, well, what's going on, that sort of thing. And so I was lucky enough to now actually there's a company called Audica in Australia. So my dad actually uses this company too because he has hearing loss since he's older and stuff. And so basically, what they do is that the government subsidizes a certain amount of the hearing aids, and then you just pay the rest off. So I finally paid off my hearing aids this year, and so yeah, now I've got rechargeable ones. But the first ones I had, they had to basically you had to change the battery every couple of days. It would be like battery is low, which is super annoying because if you're doing something
Understood.
you're just like, really? Yeah. So it was that sort of thing. And then sometimes I remember when I worked in childcare looking after kids. And so one day the battery, it said, battery's low. And so I'm out doing work with the kids and everything. So one battery died and the other one was still going. So it was like I could hear half here and then hear, and not hear in the other ear. And one of the kids said to me, oh, can we go do this? I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, wait, what did you say to me? So, it's a bit of a struggle sometimes, but because of this new advancements in technology and, the changes now I've got rechargeable batteries. But I don't think people really understand, they just assume because you're hearing impaired, you're deaf, like, you can't hear or do anything. People are like, oh, well, how do you do stuff? It's like, well, they do have things called hearing aids. Like, sometimes I just getting to a point where I'm just like annoyed because people just automatically assume that you just can't hear because you're deaf sort of thing. Like, which is ironic because that's what it means, right? You have hearing loss, you've lost your hearing. But that's not the case. People just like to assume. And so I think that was one of the hardest things for me. And I think I'm still trying to cope with it because it's like people, they treat you differently. So I wanted to model for a particular company. It was in the States. It was called, I think, Runway of Dreams. So what they do is they work with physically disabled models. But because I wasn't physically disabled, I could not be a model. And I was like, but I've got like my hearing is like physical, right? But it was more like you couldn't see it. So in their words, you had to physically be have like a disability, like lose a limb or be in a wheelchair. And I was like, isn't that discrimination? Like, isn't that, so it was just stuff like that. So even though I look like there's physically nothing wrong with me, it's just my ears that, people, because you can't really see them, they're just kind of like in my in my ear. So it's just like a little device
Okay.
that you
All
just,
right. All right.
yeah. They're not waterproof, so I'm hoping one day someone, maybe I should make them waterproof because I like to swim and stuff, and especially here we have the Great Barrier Reef is basically it's like the massive natural reef on the planet, and I wear goggles when I swim and everything. So I'm just sort of like, if I can't hear in the water, what more for seeing? Like, what if something comes up behind me and I don't know? But it was just stuff
Understood.
like, so it was just stuff like that, really. So sometimes I just laugh at some of the stuff, but no, I think it's just that trying to really to me to really share how hearing loss actually works because you'll see. I don't know if they have it in the US. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe when I go back, I'll have a look. But here they have it's basically there's a sign on a door and it'll have an ear and it'll have a line through it. Now, what that sign says is that there's a hearing loop within the building or within the room. And a lot of the time when I've checked, they said, oh, there's nothing there. I'm like, why do you have this sign on the door then? What's the point of it if there's nothing in the room? So, there's still been a little struggle in terms of that because some places, when I lived in New Zealand, the university I was at, Victoria University in Wellington, which is the capital, they have a thing where they have a device that connects to your hearing aids and it just, loops out to the whole university, which is pretty cool. But, a lot of facilities at the time just didn't have that sort of resources. But I think now they're sort of learning and everything. So I think with hearing loss, it's still getting there, but I mean, I sort of keep myself busy. I think that was one of the ways that sort of helped me was that if I keep busy doing this and doing stuff, that just makes me feel like I'm normal because it took me a long time to really accept that I had hearing loss because I used to have super hearing as a kid. I could, if all the sound in the house was turned up and people were talking, I could hear your conversation exactly what you were saying. And so, now I can't even hear anything. So, I think that was the hardest bit was really, you know, coming to terms with that about not having the hearing that I used to have and trying to see if there was ways to bring it back. But unfortunately, there isn't. So I think me keeping busy sort of helps me feel like I'm normal. So,
Okay. That makes sense, right? That definitely makes sense because I often ask people whenever I talk to them, "What's your superpower?" If you had one, what would it be? And I think you taking something like that as hearing loss and turning it around and using it in such a way of saying, you know what, I'm not going to let this restrict me. I'm going to use it in a way to be able to not only help myself, but to elevate it and elevate myself within this realm. Now, which leads me to my next question. When did you decide to say, you know what, I'm going to get into fashion and this is what I'm going to use it for, right? Because I think that's a unique way of looking at, not only taking the challenges that you have, writing a book, the hearing loss diagnosis, and the challenges that come along with that, and say, you know what, I think I'm going to do this. When did you have that aha moment?
I think it was during COVID. So, during COVID, everybody was locked down. There was nothing to do. People were still trying to understand what to do. And it was actually a friend who she gifted me a sewing machine a couple years before the pandemic. I'd never opened this box ever. I was like, oh yeah, so it just sits there. And then I became friends with a girl who was originally from Chile in South America. And she said, oh, you know what? I used to make hair ties and bags from, shirts and used to sell them off, if I wanted extra cash. So she taught me just some, simple techniques on sewing. So we finally cracked, and she used to live a couple of houses down from me. So, we both used to go to the uni. So where we lived, the uni was pretty much like right around the corner from the house kind of thing. And so we cracked open this sewing machine, and then it pretty much started from there. But I think personally, I've always been a creative child. Like I was always just, doing stuff, always decorating, always making stuff. As an only child, you have to entertain yourself, that sort of thing. So that was pretty much it, and even, most of the people that I played games with were pretty much adults. Like my mom was pretty much the first person I played games with. So, you know, that was the sort of thing. Or my cat, that sort of stuff. And so during COVID, it was just, yeah, just nothing to do. And then I think I saw something that was called Earn Your Future Challenge. When they finally started doing online stuff, it was with Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi. And I said, oh, okay, I'll have a look and see what it is. I think it was a 5 day challenge. The only thing was it was at 2 o'clock in the morning, or, and I was like, oh, do I really want to do that? So, no, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up there and, end up doing, so I basically did this challenge for the next 5 days, and I met some people and listen to what they say and everything. So it was sort of I think, a turnaround to be like, oh, okay, so everything's online. And, so it was more like, oh, things are online, people making videos. I can do all this because I've been doing this for years. But I think the biggest challenge for me was that because, like Ada said in the comments, positivity is powerful, right? When you have grown up in a house where there's just so much negativity and so much, toxicity, whatever, and especially when you come from a background where creativity is not it's not like the main number one job you can have. So culturally, in Asia, most of the jobs that people do because they do make good money is nursing, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and what's the other one? There's like one more. It'll come to me. But it's pretty much that whole category that makes money. But with those type of jobs, you need to be academically, inclined, like really good at all that. And I just was not, and I already knew I was not an academic person. That was just not me. I mean, I can pass it, but no, that wasn't for me. And so, I've always been a creative person. I used to pretty much organize people's events, organize their weddings, do the flower arrangements, that sort of stuff. And so, when COVID came, I was like, okay, I'll try something new and this online. And my dad had always encouraged me to try many new things, whether it was food or whatever the case may be. And so when COVID came, no idea what I was doing. But a friend of mine I met because I also used to model. So the company I was modeling for, it was just like a 1 day event. And, so one of the girls I met, the company was launching in the US. And so I saw a girl post about New York Fashion Week. And I was like, oh, I want to do modeling and stuff. And so I connected with her and she said, oh, she just applied. And I was like, oh, okay. So how do you do that? But then, I was telling her just about me learning how to make scrunchies and just drawing and, all this sort of stuff. And she said, oh, well, you design, right? You should apply for Fashion Week. And I said, doing what? And she said, oh, like, making stuff like clothing and all this. And I said, oh, yeah, but that's just for fun. It's nothing serious. And I don't know what it was, but she just kept bugging me about it. She's just like, oh, you should apply, you should apply. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake. All right, fine. So I did. I applied. Applied for Runway 7 Fashion in New York, which does shows at Sony Hall every February and September. They do shows out there. And I didn't expect them to reply. And so I got a message. And mind you, I had no idea about the fashion world in New York, no idea. Even though I went to fashion school here in Australia at a university, I didn't like it. I didn't like the people, just didn't like it. And so, how many years later this happens randomly. So the lady, she said, oh, we really like, your idea, what you wrote. Do you want to be in the show? And I said, doing, what would I do? She's like, oh, you can showcase. I'm like, showcase what? Um, so then I had to think quickly, because we didn't have a lot of time to do this. So I was like, okay, I'll just take, used clothing and then upcycle it all. So then I just basically did that, and I had, been practicing my sewing skills and everything. So fast forward February of what was that, 2023, we end up in New York. Mind you, I haven't been back to the States in more than 30 years. So I had no idea what was out there. I was like, okay, I'm going to go across the world and do this. No idea what's going on. And so I remember before leaving the country, I rang my dad and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, what if this doesn't work out? He's like, put your good big girl boots on and just get on the damn plane. You can do this. so, and so 2 days. So if you haven't been out to a show, it takes 2 days to get out there. Um, we're just so far away from the rest of the world, so it just takes 2 days to get anywhere. So end up in New York, and mind you, it's a 17-hour time difference. So Australia's 17 hours ahead. So I hadn't slept at all, even though I tried to sleep on the plane, but it was basically like hit the ground running, go meet all these people. But I ended up recruiting a whole bunch of different people from all the networks that I had been talking to maybe in the last year during COVID. And so, you know, none of us had ever met, but all these people agreed to be part of like the modeling team, like all different people from everywhere. We had one girl fly out from Ohio. She's a single mom. She runs about a couple of businesses. A mom and her husband and their 2 kids fly out from Canada. We had one guy who was originally from LA but was based in New York, and all these different people. And then to top it off, one girl was from America's Next Top Model. So I know the show and everything, but I didn't know who she was. And so I originally I turned it down, and I was like, and I said, oh, you know what? No, we'll do it because my dad, because he's into business and stuff like that, so he was helping me come up with strategies. So that's how we mixed it with, all these different people. So basically, they all connected with her, and she invited us to a couple of parties. But basically, none of these people had met, so we sort of had thrown them into the deep end. And previously, we had done Zooms all together and stuff like that. But, so the first show is always kind of hard. And so, we ended up doing this whole thing at New York Fashion Week. I'm like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, ended up doing a show in Philadelphia. And then, I think September that year, we go back to do a competition in New York. And so I was like, I have no idea what is going on. But we sort of just went with everything and just kept going. We're just like, I have no idea where this is going, let alone what I'm even doing. Because I'm not, compared to all the other designers that were at this thing, they've been in the industry 10 years, 20 years. They've got the whole showroom thing. I was like, showroom? What's a showroom? Um, so, and now it's been a couple of years now, and, still trying to understand the process and how it all sort of works. But obviously now I'm more cautious. But that's how we ended up doing this. And I said, if we're going to do something, I want it to be big. I said, I'm not flying halfway across the world and it's not going to mean anything. That's just a waste of money because it's a long flight too. So, you know, but when we did this, it was basically like we met. I've always been a people person, so my dad tells me um, better meeting, face to face. And so, the production that we had on the first show, they really liked us and they said, oh, here, look, this is what we'll do. And, because we had maybe 20 minutes to figure out if we were going to go on or not because it's basically a financial cost in the fashion industry. Like people put a lot of money in just to even go to X, Y, B, and Z. And if you don't have that money, well, but we come up with some sort of agreement and all this, so it worked out very well. Because I was like, how am I gonna tell these guys? And then the lady, she was one of the main people. She's like, well, this is what we'll do. And I just was like so relieved because I was like, I don't know how I'm even going to tell everybody who's literally standing backstage hoping to go on in another 20 minutes. And so they literally, I don't know what happened. If God was watching my mum because she is religious, she's always said, oh, have faith and all that sort of stuff. She's always been that sort of way. And yeah, for some reason, we ended up doing this whole thing and they all walked out on stage, did their thing, and then yeah, we're like, oh, okay. Um, but even to this day, I still have no idea how we even ended up doing this. We sort of just sort of went with it and saw what happened. But if I said I was going to do anything, it had to be meaningful and it had to be something about bringing people together. Because I modeled here in Australia and everything, and I saw how it was a little discriminatory against, people with tattoos, against plus sizes, and I wanted something that was going to include people of all different shapes and sizes. Because I've lived and traveled all over the world, it was really to say that beauty comes in all different shapes and sizes, which it actually does. And like I said, we lived in a time where there was no social media and everything. They had the film canisters and the cameras, you had to get the film developed to the shop and then bring it back. Those were the kind of films that we had and stuff like that. Or the handheld cameras, which they don't even have anymore, do they? They're just but it was really a different time and it was really about connecting with people. Nowadays you can connect with people, but I think people lose that meaning of connecting because they're always on their phone, they're always posting and stuff, whereas when we lived in that time where we didn't have technology, the conversation you had, you could agree to disagree. You didn't have to have the same opinion. You just had to be like, okay, well, that's what you think, that's what I think, but we're still friends. Whereas now you can't seem to do that. You have to agree or not. And it's just, yeah. So, it's completely changed. But I think that's where a lot of my identity and a lot of what we've been doing comes from that, really just from traveling and really connecting with people.
Wow, man, that just listening to that, I'm just thinking to myself, like, you guys inspire me to make me want to do more. People always look at me, Tony, how much more are you going to do? Well, after listening to yours, I'm like, you know what? I've got to up my game. I have to. I have to up my game. I have to do more now, right? So I don't have to go out here and I don't know what else I'm going to do, but I'm going to figure it out. Well, actually, I do know what I'm going to do. I got some surprising stuff coming. As soon as I can learn it, but I think I'm going to do it, right? Because why not? I think it's going to be fun, a lot of fun, and again, just taking things to the next step, uh, dreaming bigger, and working my butt off to do it, right? You know,
Yay!
of course, you already know, and you're going to possibly be a part of it, and and a lot of other things that's got going on, So, again, as we begin to wrap this up, I know. You got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm excited, and then I'm proud of you first and foremost to
Thank
say that I'm
you.
so proud of you,
Mm,
watching you grow, and as I mentioned before, and just excited to see everything else that you got going on, and everything else that that you're going to be doing in the future. I'm so proud of you and excited to see it. So now my next question would be, as we begin to wrap this up, how can people find you, Denise?
um, like I say to my mom and dad, you can just type my name into Google. No, but
They're
but no, my
gonna be
mom.
like, "Who is this Tony calling my daughter his niece?"
Yeah, yeah. My dad's like, oh, I think my mom was like, oh, you've got lots of aunties and uncles. I'm like, yeah, because sometimes when I see people, she's like, which auntie and uncle is that? I'm like, I don't know, but it's the one that has glasses, or I have to describe them. She's like, oh, that one. Whereas my dad was just, he just sort of laughs, but he really likes it all. But I'm on Facebook, Instagram, I think LinkedIn. We're working. The lady I'm working with has the website sorted, so I need to get that. I should actually get that sorted today. But yeah, so no, so we're getting up the website for the business, and yeah, then I think that's where else am I on? Pretty much, yeah. You could type me into Google, but I will come up somewhere. But it's definitely I'm definitely on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm trying to use LinkedIn more, but I'm on Facebook as well. So yes, I will pop up somewhere. I'm on YouTube.
This is true.
But
This is
yes,
true.
yeah, no. So I think yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me, and I think a lot of the the biggest I think the biggest takeaway is that no matter what you're going through. So my dad had a son from a previous marriage who I was actually close to. So that person has passed away at least a couple of years now. And so, I've also had close friends who have passed from cancer. And so, when you get to that sort of stage in life where you lose, really good people who are always in your corner, it can be hard and it can be challenging. But I think, as Ada said in the comments, positivity is powerful. And I think when you have people who always, say that you've done a good job, that we should actually take it in because it honestly it makes you feel better, right? But I think it also helps you motivate yourself more. And I think that was one of the biggest things about when I hear people, they like what we do and everything. I think that's one of the biggest things that keeps me going. Because sometimes it's hard. You're just like, is it working? I haven't seen $1 million yet, So but you just have to keep hanging in there. I think some of the biggest quotes that you'll see on the internet talk about, the ones who make it are the ones who didn't give up or quit. And I think that's the biggest thing about it, especially being an entrepreneur and someone who has a business, you have to just keep going no matter how hard it is. Just yeah, there's a light at the top end of the tunnel. Wait, doesn't even make sense in English. You know what I mean.
No, I do understand what you mean. And you hit the nail on the head. You have to keep going no matter how hard it is, no matter the challenges that come about, because you are going to do it. Part of this road of success is long. Some parts are going to be very lonely, and it's challenging. It comes with its own set of challenges, right? The sacrifices that you're going to make, the people that you're going to lose, the people that you're going to gain, and the people that you gain aren't going to amount to the people that you lose, but the people that come into will help you make that difference. And they're going to root you on. It's normally the people that you least expected, right? You know what I'm saying? But it's definitely worth it if you stick to it. So now my next question to you would be, if you had a superpower, what would it
Superpower. I'd like to be invisible. just to
be?
like, just to, sometimes just to hear what people say, just to sort of haunt them, like a ghost, just to, But then I'd also like to, I've got some friends who are they're very famous. I've got this one indigenous friend who became quite famous on TikTok and everything. Everywhere we go and we catch up, people, they want to take photos, like while we'll be having like some food or just sitting on the bench or something. Like, can we take your photos? So I've seen what fame can do to you. And then I've seen other things where I've had some friends who were pretty much like me, came from separated families. They made it very well for themselves. They drive, some fancy cars, but I've seen how that also changes their personality a bit as well. It's sort of like, oh, I don't want to buy secondhand, the whole 9 yards. And sometimes when you sort of moving up into the world, you have to sort of come back down from the clouds a little bit because it can get to a point where you're sort of like, oh, is that how you want to treat people? And I have my days where I'm like, oh, okay, but then some days I'm like, that wasn't me. What happened? Like, so it can get you if you're not careful. But I think the biggest thing is that you have to try to remain humble to yourself, even though, like, we doesn't matter where we've come from. And if we won $1 million or whatever the case may be, you had to start somewhere, but you also have to remember that you can't get to a point where it's going to consume you. You still have to be, at least a decent human being to somebody. So I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
yeah, I
exactly.
think that's the thing. Hmm.
I think part of that journey too, you hit it on the head. Don't forget where you came from. I think humility and humbleness is the key foundation. If you're going to build something, don't ever forget where you came from. Most of us that are going to make it come from humble beginnings through humility. And there's a strength that comes along with that because if you don't focus on the money and everything, I think there's a sense of big strength that comes along with that to say, you know what, I know where I came from, and I need to hold on to that because it makes you try even harder to to keep building. But I think in a lot of ways, it reminds you to reach back and grab the next person to bring them up, to teach them um, how not to struggle the way that you did. I think that, with the wisdom, the knowledge of wisdom that is attained is more precious than anything that you can ever give to anyone. It's that old saying, you can give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, or you can teach a person to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime, right? And even on the days that they don't catch fish, it's the fact that they got out there and actually put in the work to do it. So the fish is just a bonus. And that's just like in life. Everything else is just a bonus, but you have to show up. You have to put in the work. And with that being said, Francis, I want to say thank you again for joining me. This has been a long time in the works to get you on the show and everything. And, I'm really, really, happy that we was able to make it happen today. And we definitely, you guys are going to see a lot more of her. I got a lot more other things coming up, and table talks, etc., that we're going to be doing. And she may even pop up. You never know. But her information is in a YouTube channel. Go over there and check her out. She got a lot of great things coming. And for everyone else out there, thank you guys for tuning in to the YouTube channel. You said you have a YouTube channel. What's your YouTube channel?
Well, I'm more like I'm on YouTube. I'm just on other people's channels. Even though
Okay,
some
okay.
people, even though some people said, "Why don't you put a YouTube channel on?" I'm like, I could, but I'm just on everybody else's channel.
That's all right. You need to get your own YouTube channel because I think that'll be pretty doggone cool, right? To watch the day in the life of Frances Helena and all the things that she does, but also great conversationalist. And for everyone else, guys, what I'm saying, we're going to wrap this one up. Happy Father's Day to the fathers out there, to the children out there with fathers. Don't forget to wish them a happy Father's Day. For those fathers like myself, whose children who are in heaven, my heart is with you. And again, happy Father's Day to you as well, from one bereaved father to another. Um, Francis, we got to do this again for everyone else. We're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We're going to see you guys in the next one. Of course, we do the podcast every day. So be sure to tune in. And if it's your first time tuning in, hey, subscribe, like, comment, share. Grief, let's talk about a podcast, YouTube. See you guys in the next one. We love you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.